He gave his brother a kidney to save his life. But that same brother later called him a beggar. What happened next will break your heart. Long ago, in the quiet town of Oiri, there lived two brothers, named Daniel and Joseph. They were born only 2 years apart, but they were very different in nature. Daniel was calm and gentle. He spoke softly and always had a smile on his face. Joseph, the younger one, was bold, fast-talking, and full of big dreams. He liked loud places, bright lights, and quick success. Their family was poor. Their mother sold bread beside the dusty roadside. She worked hard every day, from morning till late evening. Their father had died when both boys were still young, leaving their mother to raise them alone. Daniel, being the older one, stayed home to help her. He carried baskets, baked bread, and watched over her stall when she was tired. Joseph, however, always wanted more. He would stare at the buses heading to Lagos and say, "One day, I'll be rich like them." When he was 17, he left home. He hugged his mother, promised to send money, and walked away. Daniel stayed behind. He never complained. He became like a son and a husband to his mother, her strength, her hope. Years passed. Daniel learned how to fix cars. He worked as a part-time mechanic in a small workshop. His hands were always greasy, but his heart stayed clean. He lived a simple life, always smiling, even when he had nothing to eat. He was faithful, hard-working, and humble. Meanwhile, Joseph became a big man in Lagos. He was smart, streetwise, and lucky. He started as a shop boy, but soon began importing goods from overseas. He got contracts with politicians and businessmen. He built a house, bought cars, and married a beautiful woman named Grace. He rarely called home anymore, but Daniel always prayed for him. Then one day, Daniel's life changed with a single phone call. He was lying under a car, fixing a leaking fuel tank. His phone rang. He wiped his hands on a rag and answered. "Hello?" It was a woman's voice, shaking with tears. "Daniel, please come. Please come to Lagos. It's Grace. Joseph is in the hospital. He's dying." Daniel froze. He felt his heart jump. "Dying?" he whispered. But before he could ask more, the call ended. Without wasting a second, Daniel packed a small bag, borrowed some money, and took the night bus to Lagos. The journey was long and rough. By morning, his clothes were dusty, and his eyes were red from lack of sleep. He hadn't eaten since yesterday. When he reached the hospital, Grace was waiting outside the ward. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She ran to him and hugged him tightly. "Thank you for coming," she sobbed. Inside the private ward, Daniel saw his brother. Joseph lay weak on the bed, covered in tubes and wires. The machines beside him beeped slowly. His skin looked pale and lifeless. His lips were dry. He turned his head slowly and whispered, "Danny." Daniel rushed to him. "What happened?" he asked. Grace wiped her tears. "Kidney failure," she said softly. Daniel's heart sank. The doctor entered. "He needs a kidney transplant," the doctor explained. "A living donor. As soon as possible." The room fell silent. Grace spoke again, crying. "They tested me. I don't match." Daniel looked at Joseph, whose eyes were filled with tears. "I don't want to die, Danny," Joseph whispered weakly. Without thinking twice, Daniel said, "I'll do the test." 2 days later, the result came. Daniel was a perfect match. The doctor explained everything, the pain, the risk, the danger. He said, "Life with one kidney is possible, but you must take great care." Daniel listened quietly. Then he asked just one question. "If I don't give him, will he die?" The doctor nodded sadly. Daniel didn't think twice. "Then I will give," he said. That night, Daniel sat beside his brother's bed. The room was quiet except for the sound of machines. Joseph turned his face toward him and said, "Why did you come?" Daniel smiled. "Because you're my brother." "Too." Joseph blinked. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. Daniel nodded. "Maybe not, but I'm not doing it because you deserve it. I'm doing it because I love you." Joseph turned his face away, and tears rolled down his cheeks. For the first time in years, he felt small again. Not a rich man. Not a businessman. Just a brother. The next morning they were taken into the operating room. Two brothers on two tables. One was giving life, the other was holding on to it. The surgery lasted for hours. When it was finally over, the doctor smiled. "It went well," he said. Grace fell to her knees, crying and thanking God. When Daniel opened his eyes hours later, his body ached. But he smiled weakly. The nurses clapped for him when he tried to sit up. Grace hugged him and said, "You are a gift from God." Joseph survived. He cried when he saw Daniel. "You saved me," he whispered. Daniel smiled faintly. "You are my blood," he said. 2 weeks later, Daniel was discharged. He walked slowly, weak, but alive. Before he left for home, Joseph handed him a white envelope. "There's 100,000 inside," he said. "Thank you, brother." Daniel nodded and smiled. "Take care of yourself," he said softly. Then he returned to his small town. For some days, he waited for Joseph to call. He didn't. Daniel told himself, he must be busy. But weeks passed. Then months. And the calls never came. One evening, Daniel tried calling Joseph. The number didn't connect. He tried Grace's number too. No answer. He sent messages, no reply. Days later, a friend who worked in Lagos visited and told him, "Joseph bought a mansion in Lekki. He's moving with governors now. He even has a Lexus Jeep." Daniel smiled faintly but said nothing. Inside, his heart felt heavy. His body was still weak from surgery. His mechanic job was gone. He couldn't lift heavy tools anymore. But he never complained. Weeks later, he tried again to reach his brother. The call said, "Number blocked." Daniel's heart broke slowly, piece by piece. He couldn't understand. He had given his blood, his body, his very life. Yet his brother had shut him out. One morning, he borrowed some money from a friend and took a bus to Lagos. He arrived, dusty and tired, holding a small bag. He went straight to Joseph's office and waited by the gate. He stood there for hours under the hot Sunday. When the guards asked who he was, he said softly, "I'm his brother." They laughed and told him to wait. By evening, Joseph came out. He was wearing a fine suit and dark glasses. People followed him, calling him "Sir." Daniel's heart lifted with joy. He waved and called, "Joe, Joe, it's me." Joseph stopped for a second, then frowned. He looked around nervously. "Please don't embarrass me here," he whispered. Daniel froze. "Embarrass you?" "Joe, it's me. Daniel." Joseph looked cold. "And did I not give you money? Do you want to beg me again?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "No. I didn't ask for anything," he said quietly. Joseph sighed. "Then go home. I'm busy." He entered his car and drove away. Daniel stood there, his legs shaking. The guards stared at him until he turned away. He had no money left for a bus. He walked slowly down the street, his eyes full of tears. The city lights blurred, and his chest felt heavy. That night, he slept near a small kiosk by the roadside. He watched cars pass by, wondering if Joseph was inside one of them. He looked up at the stars and whispered, "Maybe God saw everything. That's enough. Kindness may be forgotten by men, but heaven never forgets a heart that gives." That night, Daniel rented a small room in a cheap motel. He sat on the bed, staring at the floor. He had no money left, no food, and no friend in Lagos. His eyes were red from crying. His stomach was empty, and his heart felt broken. He touched his side gently. The scar from the surgery still itched sometimes. He whispered to himself, "I gave you life, and you gave me silence." Morning came, and Daniel decided to work. He began doing small jobs, washing cars, carrying loads, anything that paid. He wanted to save enough to go back home. Days passed, and he kept trying. One afternoon, a kind man saw him sleeping beside a shop and asked, "Why are you here?" Daniel told his story. The man felt pity and helped him with transport money. Daniel thanked him again and again. At last, he returned home to Oiri. He was thinner now, and quieter than before. He no longer talked much in public. His eyes looked older, tired, like someone who had lived too many lives. Meanwhile, Joseph was shining brighter in Lagos. He had big friends and big cars. He had a political appointment now and was seen at parties with powerful men. He looked strong on the outside, but something was wrong inside. At night, he could not sleep. He would wake up sweating, hearing strange voices. He started seeing shadows move in his room. He lost his appetite. The doctor checked him many times but said, "You are fine." But Joseph knew he wasn't fine. He knew something unseen was following him. 2 months later, Daniel was sitting on a wooden bench outside his mother's house. The evening air was cool, and the crickets sang softly. He was staring at the sky when a black car stopped in front of the gate. The door opened, and Grace stepped out. Her eyes were full of fear. She walked toward Daniel quickly. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "He's dying again." Daniel didn't reply. Grace continued, "He's been vomiting blood. Doctors can't explain it. He keeps calling your name in his sleep." Daniel still said nothing. He just looked at the ground. Grace dropped to her knees. "Please, Daniel," she cried. "Come and see him." Daniel stood up slowly, turned around, and walked into the house without saying a word. Grace stayed kneeling for a long time before she stood and left. She had no choice but to return to Lagos. In the hospital that night, Joseph lay awake. He was sweating and shaking. Then suddenly, he sat up, gasping for air. Grace rushed to his side. "What is it again?" she asked. Joseph's eyes were wide with fear. "I saw him," he whispered. Grace frowned. "Who?" "Daniel," he said. "He was standing over my bed. He was bleeding. He said I should give it back." Grace's heart began to race. She quickly grabbed her phone and called their pastor. "Pastor, please come. He's seeing things again. Please pray for him." The pastor arrived within the hour. He prayed for Joseph, placing his hand on his head. When he was done, he turned to Grace and said, "Take him home. This is not sickness of the body. This is something spiritual. Only one person can save him, Daniel." Grace nodded and wept. The pastor promised to talk to Daniel himself. The next morning, Daniel was outside sweeping when his phone rang. It was the pastor. He spoke kindly, but firmly. "My son, your brother needs you. Please come and see him." At first, Daniel refused. He said quietly, He forgot me when I gave him life. Now he remembers me because he is dying again. But the pastor kept pleading. Finally, Daniel agreed, not because of love, but because of questions burning inside his heart. 2 days later, he went to Lagos again. This time, he entered Joseph's mansion in Lekki. The guards opened the gate after the pastor explained who he was. Daniel walked in slowly, looking around. The marble floors shone like mirrors. Big chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Servants moved quietly in the hallway. The house smelled of perfume and fear. Inside the bedroom, Joseph lay on a big white bed. His face was pale, his lips dry, his eyes hollow. He looked like a king dying in his castle. When Joseph saw Daniel, he weakly lifted his hand. "Brother," he whispered. Daniel did not move closer. He looked around the room. At the gold, the pictures, the fine furniture. Then his eyes returned to Joseph. "So this is where you brought my kidney," he said softly. Joseph swallowed hard. "I was wrong," he said. Daniel's face stayed cold. "You gave me silence," he said. "I gave you life, and you gave me shame." Joseph started crying. "I didn't mean it," he said weakly. "I was lost." Grace stood by the door, tears running down her cheeks. She spoke softly. "You don't know what happened behind the scenes." Daniel turned to her. "What happened?" Grace looked down and hesitated. Then she said quietly, "After the surgery, when Joseph started walking again, he stood before the mirror one day. He saw the scar on his side. He hated it. It reminded him of weakness." Daniel said nothing. Grace continued. "He touched the scar. Again. And again. Then he cried. He wasn't crying from pain, but from shame. He felt small, like a man who once begged for help. In his heart, he feared you would look at him differently. So he told himself, 'Before Daniel reminds me of my weakness, I will push him away.' He decided to cut you off." Daniel's mouth fell open. "So, he sent me away because of his pride?" Grace nodded sadly. "Yes. He didn't even let me thank you. He wanted to forget everything. But that pain stayed inside him. It never left." Daniel sat down on a chair nearby. He felt dizzy. All the pain, all the silence, all the rejection, and the reason was pride. At that moment, the door opened again. The family pastor entered quietly. He greeted everyone and walked straight to Joseph's bed. He placed a hand on Joseph's head and prayed. Then he turned to Daniel. "My son," he said gently, "there is something you must know." Daniel looked up, confused. The pastor continued, "The day you gave your kidney, something happened in the spirit world. A bond was created, a covenant of blood. When you gave your organ, you gave a part of your life." Everyone in the room went silent. The pastor's voice grew deep. "But when Joseph rejected you, that bond broke. And when a bond made from life is broken, it turns into a curse." Grace gasped. Joseph's eyes widened in fear. The pastor nodded slowly. "When a man gives his blood, his body, his life, and is forgotten, rejection brings torment. That's why Joseph is dying again. It's not his kidney. It's his heart." Daniel closed his eyes. For the first time, he felt tears roll down his face. He whispered, "So his pain is my pain too." The pastor touched his shoulder. "Yes, son. But only forgiveness can heal this curse." Daniel stood up and looked at Joseph. He saw not a proud man anymore, but a broken one. He walked closer and took Joseph's trembling hand. Joseph looked at him, tears running down his cheeks. "Brother, please forgive me," he said weakly. "I was blind. Daniel's eyes were full of pain. He wanted to speak, but his lips shook. Then he said slowly, "I forgive you." At that moment, Joseph cried loudly, his whole body shaking. The pastor began to pray again. Grace knelt beside the bed, crying too. The room filled with peace, soft and heavy like morning rain. Joseph's breathing slowed. He looked at Daniel one last time. "Thank you," he whispered. "You saved me twice." Then, he closed his eyes. "Thank you." Daniel stood there silently, holding his brother's cold hand. Grace sobbed quietly in the corner. The pastor whispered, "God has taken him home." Daniel turned toward the window. The sun was rising outside, filling the room with golden light. He took a deep breath. His heart was heavy, but also free. He looked down at his hand still holding Joseph's and said softly, "You couldn't keep my gift, but I'll keep your memory." Pride breaks the bridge that love builds. Forgiveness is the only road that leads home. The room was quiet. The air felt heavy, thick with fear and hope. Grace wiped her eyes and turned to the pastor. "So, what do we do?" she asked, her voice shaking. The pastor looked at Daniel slowly. "You," he said. "You're the one with the key." Daniel blinked. "Me?" "Yes," the pastor said firmly. "Only you can end this. You must speak the words. You must forgive him not with your lips, but from your heart. Only then will this curse break." Daniel froze. His hands began to tremble. All this time, he had held everything inside. He had been quiet when they forgot him. He had smiled when he wanted to cry. But now, all the pain he buried began to rise. He fell to his knees. For the first time since he was rejected, Daniel cried. Not soft tears, but deep, painful ones, the kind that break the chest open. He cried for the nights he slept outside. He cried for the days he went hungry. He cried for the customers he lost, for the dreams that died. He cried for the scar on his body and for the scar in his heart. The pastor and Grace stood in silence. Only the sound of Daniel's sobs filled the room. Then slowly, Daniel wiped his face and stood up. He walked to Joseph's bed. Joseph looked weak, frightened, and full of guilt. Daniel placed his hand on his brother's chest. His voice shook, but his words were clear. "I forgive you," he said softly. "Not because you deserve it, but because I want to be free. I want God to hear me again. You took my kindness and threw it away, but I won't carry your punishment anymore. I give you peace. I give you back your life. May God judge between us." The pastor closed his eyes and whispered, "Amen." Suddenly, Joseph began to shake. His body trembled like someone caught in a storm. His eyes rolled back, and he screamed. Grace cried out and held his hand. The pastor pressed his hand on Joseph's head and began to pray. "Every curse of rejection, every tormenting spirit, leave this man," he shouted. Joseph's body shook harder. The room filled with noise, voices, tears, prayers, and fear. After 10 long minutes, everything stopped. Joseph lay still. Then slowly, he opened his eyes. He looked around and smiled weakly. "The voices," he whispered. "They are gone." Grace began to cry again, this time with relief. The pastor thanked God and raised his hands in prayer. Daniel stepped back. He felt a deep calm inside his chest. Without waiting for thanks or praise, Daniel turned and walked toward the door. He didn't want gifts or money. He didn't even look back. He just walked out of the house, out of the gate, and out of the pain. 2 weeks later, Daniel was in his mother's old room when a letter arrived. The envelope came from Lagos. He opened it carefully. Inside, there was a bank check for 5 million naira and a handwritten letter. The letter said, "Daniel, I don't know if you will ever speak to me again. I don't deserve it. But I want to fix what I broke. Use this to start something new. You always dreamed of owning a workshop. Let this be your beginning. Thank you for saving me twice. Your brother, Joseph. Daniel sat there quietly. He read the letter again and again. Tears rolled down his face. Not from pain this time, but from peace. He folded the letter and whispered, "Thank you, brother." Months passed. One morning the sun rose gently over Douglas Road. The sky was golden and the wind was soft. Children laughed and ran past a new building, painted blue and white. On the wall was written in bold letters, "Danny's Auto Works." Daniel stood outside, smiling at the sign. The smell of fresh paint filled the air. He touched the door gently and whispered, "This is for you, Mama." Inside the workshop, there was a new tire machine, a car lift, and shiny tools. Everything was bought with the money Joseph sent. Daniel had opened the shop quietly, no party, no music. He didn't want attention. He only wanted peace. The sound of a car engine pulled him out of his thoughts. A silver Toyota Camry stopped at the entrance. Daniel was under a bonnet fixing a bolt when he heard the car door slam. He stood up and wiped his hands on a rag. Then he froze. Standing near the car was Joseph. He looked different, thinner, darker, and humble. He wore a simple native outfit and had shaved his beard. "Good morning, Danny," Joseph said softly. Daniel nodded but said nothing. Joseph stepped closer. "I came to see you." Daniel folded his arms. "What do you want?" Joseph looked down. "To thank you again." "You already did," Daniel said quietly. "I want to do more," Joseph whispered. Daniel frowned. "What more?" Joseph hesitated. "I want to be part of your life again." Daniel stared at him for a long time. The air between them was heavy. Finally, Daniel said, "I forgive you, Joseph, but I don't want to walk backward." Joseph's face fell. He nodded slowly. "Okay. I understand." He turned as if to leave, but then stopped. Instead of walking away, he picked up a wrench from the table. "I'll help out," he said simply. Daniel watched in silence. Joseph worked all morning beside him. Oil stained his clean clothes, but he didn't care. He changed tires, lifted engines, and cleaned tools. When Daniel closed the workshop that evening, Joseph quietly went home. The next day, he came again, and the next. Each day, he stayed till sunset, helping without pay, speaking little. He was trying to rebuild what he broke not with money, but with humility. On the third day, Daniel finally called him aside. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange. The workshop was quiet except for the sound of tools clinking. Daniel looked at Joseph for a long moment. Then he opened his arms and hugged him tightly. Joseph froze for a second, then hugged him back, crying. "You are my brother," Daniel said softly. "You will always be my brother. Think about our mother, about where we came from. We were happy even when we were poor. We should be happier now." Joseph couldn't speak. Tears rolled down his face like a river. He dropped to his knees. "Forgive me for everything," he said. "For the shame, the silence, the pride." Daniel lifted him up. "There's nothing left to forgive," he said. They stood there, two brothers, bound again not by blood, but by grace. Grace the woman came the next day. She stood at the workshop door, watching them work side by side. She smiled through her tears. For the first time in a long while, peace had returned. That night, Daniel sat outside his workshop, watching the stars. The crickets sang softly, and the cool wind touched his face. He remembered everything, the pain, the hunger, the betrayal. But now, it all felt far away, like an old wound that had healed. He whispered, "God, thank you. I am free." He looked at his hands, strong and steady again, and smiled. Then he closed his eyes and listened to the night. Not all betrayal comes from enemies. Sometimes, it comes from those we love the most. Giving does not make you weak. It makes you powerful. Even when your kindness is thrown away, it still shines in heaven. Pride destroys what love builds, but forgiveness rebuilds what pride destroys. Forgiveness doesn't mean returning to pain. It means freeing your heart from chains. And sometimes, God rewards you not through the people you helped, but through your strength to live again without them.